Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? We're at that point in the afternoon where it's really hard to stay awake and sit down for this long, so please feel free to stand up and stretch and move around if you would like to. I would really like to joyfully thank Anne Klein and Learned Foot for putting this together, for inviting all of us. I know how much work these things are to create, and I'm really grateful and just happy to be here. And it feels to me kind of like a family reunion, or we can say a reunion among old friends, and as Padma said, also an opportunity to meet new ones. So thank you. I mean, if you've even been within shouting distance from me, you know that 2 weeks ago I just completed a major project that I've been working on for, let's just say, in short, many years. The full translation of Sera Khandro Dewai Dorjé's autobiography. Thank you. And by complete, I mean I'm still editing it, but it's there, and this is 611 pages in English, double-spaced, so it's been a journey. So I think about this pretty much all the time going on in the back of my head as I'm having conversations and kind of operating in the world. And so I thought what I would do today is take that project and combine it with Professor Anne Klein's interest and commitment to Adzom and talk about the relationship between these two topics, Sera Khandro and Adzom. So all of this boils down to one question. How do available sources represent Sera Khandro Dewai Dorjé's relationship to Adzom? And what should we make of the considerable differences between available sources? We know that what actually happened in any given situation is a matter of who tells the story, why, when, and to whom. History and narratives about it are thus always perspectival, determined by the vantage points of the tellers. This is very much the case in the available historical records by and about the key figures in my talk today, namely Adzom Drukpa Drondo Pao Dorjé, his son Adzom Gyaltse Gyurme Dorjé, and Sera Khandro Dewai Dorjé. There's a lot of Dorjé there. It's like a triple threat of Dorjé. All three of these figures wrote autobiographies and are the subjects of biographies written by their disciples. But, spoiler alert, Sera Khandro had much more to say about the Adzom father and son duo than they did about her. I'll end this paper with some conjectures about why this is, and I invite you to share your own ideas about this in our discussions. So we've already heard about Adzom Drukpa Drondo Pao Dorjé in other talks, especially Learned's talk yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat, but just to say if you want to learn more about him in English translation, great sources would be the probably the first biography written about Adzom Drukpa by Namkhai Norbu's grandmother, Lundrup Tso, which was first translated by Adriano Clemente in Italy at Marigar, and then ended up in the US. Then there's also, of course, our very own Alex Gardner and Samten Chopel's Treasury of Lives entry, which is very helpful. And last but very much not least, Learned Foot's dissertation just completed in 2023, titled Tibetan Life Writings of Adzom Drukpa Meeting the Lady of the Skies, which is a wonderful resource. Congratulations, Learned. And picking up right where Learned left off in his talk yesterday, he was talking about the 92-page autobiography written by Adzom Drukpa in 1926, and then a 252-page biography penned by his son, Gyurme Dorjé, in 1945. So I'm picking up right there with a comment at the end of that biography. As we heard yesterday, nowhere in Adzom's autobiography or in Gyurme Dorjé's biography about him is Sera Khandro's name mentioned in any form. What seems to be the closest hint of her appears in Gyurme Dorjé's closing remarks about his father's passing. After Adzom Drukpa became ill, Gyurme Dorjé writes that his disciples requested him to remain in the world by doing a number of ritual accumulations and supplications, and, quote, the characteristic of compounded phenomena is that they always have the nature of impermanence. Hence, for us also, even though many excellent Siddha yogis such as the great Vidyadhara Adzom have appeared, in the end, no one can repel death. Knowing this, there were also prophecies indicating that if auspicious connections excellently aligned in accordance with Khandro's symbolic prophecies, his life could be sustained for a long time. For the sake of prolonging his life, 2 qualified female consorts arrived. There was a clear symbolic prophecy indicating that by the power of the support they provided for his longevity, the hair on his head would turn black 3 times, new teeth would grow 3 times, and he would receive most of his profound treasures effortlessly. But others mixed up the auspicious connections, and they disappeared. So this is not exactly a smoking gun, proving that Sera Khandro was one of these 2 unnamed qualified female consorts who visited Adzom Drukpa prior to his passing. But at least it indicates that Adzom Drukpa did summon female consorts, or zungma, for the sake of enhancing his longevity. As for Adzom Drukpa's son, Gyurme Dorjé, available sources about his life are even less forthcoming about whether or not he had any connection to Sera Khandro. Gyurme Dorjé's collected works are published in 5 volumes. The most relevant for our purposes is the first volume, in which we can find his relatively short autobiography. It's 27 published pages. I don't think he finished it. It looks like it's signed by a disciple, perhaps after his passing, as well as the biography written long after his death by his disciple Pema Kunzang Rangdrol, which was published in 1980 or 81. Also interesting is the collection of advice in Volume 2, because each individual piece of advice is titled by the name of the person Gyurme Dorjé was advising. So we can see that out of 59 advisees, 6 were female and none were Sera Khandro. In Gyurme Dorjé's autobiography, we learn that Jamgon Kongtrol and Gyarong Tertun both prophesied that Adzom Drukpa needed to rely on an authentic Khandro, which inspired him to father children, including Gyurme Dorjé, with a woman named Tashi Hamo. We learn of the birth of his elder sister, Semo Yangchen Hamo, also named Chime Wangmo, then the birth of other siblings before Gyurme Dorjé's birth in the Fire Monkey year. And just a note on years, there are 1 million different birth and death dates for Gyurme Dorjé circulating in English sources, but there's only one birth date and 1 death date in his actual Sungbum. As a youth, Gyurme Dorjé was recognized to be an incarnation of Mindro Ling Terdak Lingpa. Based on Gyurme Dorjé's autobiographical reflections, the centerpiece of his life was receiving extensive trainings in Buddhist teachings and disseminating them far and wide to an array of disciples he extensively lists. The narrative feature that strikes me the most about Gyurme Dorjé's writing is its list-like character, orbiting around names of teachers and teachings, first those he studied with and later those he taught. Gyurme Dorjé does not seem to suffer from a lack of self-confidence. He recalls how he was such a bright student that he didn't really need to study. He just knew how to write without making any effort. So to be fair, Sera Khandro says she learned how to write in a vision, so it may just be us academic people that find such things extremely difficult and laborious. Gyurme Dorjé was not your typical child. He recounts that renunciation and authentic compassion arose naturally within him, and that he spent his childhood pretending to build temples, give empowerments, and so forth. He began his ngondro at age 11, though he recounts difficulties in concentration during his teenage years, don't we all? He describes receiving the Chetsun Nintig and the Nintig Yabshi many times among an array of other teachings. In the Wood Tiger year in 1914 or 1915, when he was 19 years old, he requested ordination vows from Katok Situ Turkey Gyamtso, and he presents himself as living as a monk for his entire life, as does his biographer, Pema Kunzong Rongjol, who emphasizes the impeccable purity with which he held those vows his whole life. At the end of his writing, he lists extensive numbers of illustrious religious figures he taught, divided according to their homeland, including places all over eastern Tibet, Bhutan, and India. Among this long list of personages, only 2 are female, and both of them are royal. They are the Chakla Kingdom's royal family, including King Jigdral, Nashi Memba Sonam Wangmo, his queen, and their daughter, Nordzin Wangmo. In contrast, Sera Khandro had a lot to say about going to Adzom Gar. She went on 2 separate occasions, and I'm going to launch right into her description. I'll read a long passage now so you can just get a feeling for her writing. Her first visit to Adzom Gar took place in 1923. And before I tell you what she had to say about it, I have 2 points on this slide I wrote down so I wouldn't forget. One is I would like to thank my PhD student, Somtsobum, with whom I've been reading this material recently, and it's been immensely helpful. And another thing, in order to save time, I'm blowing through some of this passage. The parts that are already published in my book, Love and Liberation, it's on those pages if you want to see what I'm skipping right now, so I don't keep you from your coffee break. Okay. At that time, a messenger from Adzom Gar arrived with a letter saying I needed to go to Adzom Gar. I said the following to the master, who is Drimyo Sir, son of Dujun Lingpa. I won't go to Adzom Gar. Okay, skipping forward a little. I have no thought that I need to stay together with a consort, nor do I want to go now. This is my answer. Even so, I'm a helpless woman, so it's easy for just about anyone to lead me around like a stray dog. Because Lama Adzom is a holy being renowned in all of China and Tibet, if he sends a messenger with a letter summoning an inferior one like me, of course I must go. I'm skipping a little, starting where that red arrow is. Sera Khandro goes on and says, I'll miss you, Drimyo Sir, so much. I don't want to go. And then when it says, Jai Shalne, the master, Drimyo Sir, replied, I too pine for you. If I could never be apart from you for even one day, I would feel extremely happy, happier than if I had a house full of jewels. Yet, if you could be a support for the auspicious connections that prolong Lama Adzom's life, that's Adzom Drukpa Drondul Pao Dorjé, the father, if not for 1 year, then even for 1 month. If not for 1 month, then even for 1 day. In general, this would benefit the Buddhist teachings, and sentient beings would be happy. In particular, it would be a resource for you and others to accumulate a vast store of merit. Specifically, as it was previously expressed in your Vajra prophecy, if the essential point of an auspicious connection with Akshara Vajra occurs, that you don't have to be a Sanskritist to figure out is Gyurmi Dorjé in Sanskrit, benefit will certainly arise for the lives, dharma, and disciples of all of us here and there, here being in Golok at Dujum Lingpa's place, and there at Adzom Gar. So these words are actually predicting, Drimyo Sir's voice, predicting that both father Adzom Gar and Adzom Drukpa and son Gyurmi Dorjé will be helpful to her. I'm skipping a part. She travels down from over in here, in Golok, over to Sera Tekchen Chungor Ling, down to Getse Dralakun, and then down to Adzom Gar. We journeyed onward, and on the 13th day of the 4th month of 1923, we arrived at Adzom Gar. They came out to welcome us, and we nourished favorable, auspicious connections. Then, when we met Drondul Pao Dorjé, he said, your arriving now is excellent. Everyone, including myself and others, had many auspicious visions. In particular, for a long time, I've had the perception that you are a rebirth of Khandro Kunga Buma. I clarified this to those around me, including Angak and others. After that, when I heard that in Golok there was a laywoman treasure revealer, I determined that you were the emanation of Buma. I heard the full story of who you are when some lamas and monks who have a dharma connection with you came here. I made a connection with your oral transmission cycle, Dorjé Pagmo Druptap, Vajravarahi Sadhana, which I have a copy of here. We spoke in detail about many such dharmic and worldly matters. He added, now since astrology indicates it's a good time, please recite reading transmissions of your registries. Just for the sake of an auspicious connection, I offered him the reading transmission for the registry I wrote down when I was 13 years old. The Lama asked, which Lama said that you're a treasure revealer? I replied, I am someone who never met a Lama before I was 30 years old. I never had a chance to ask if I was a treasure revealer. From the time I was 15, I wrote down whatever I remembered and sang songs about it. Other than that, I've never investigated whether or not I'm a treasure revealer. If one realizes the true nature of reality, all phenomena arises as symbols and metaphors. I'm one with a walking stick, but no matter what happens, I cannot fall. I am someone who writes down whatever arises and says whatever I know as pith instructions. The Lama replied, that's Adzom Drukpa, you seem to be someone who sees yourself as a treasure revealer. Otherwise, all the other treasure revealers were given the title treasure revealer by their root Lama or another being who's attained a level of realization. I've never heard someone calling themselves a treasure revealer. I explained. For those treasure revealers, it's like a Chinese emperor bestowing titles on their subjects. They may need someone to say, you've attained the rank of treasure revealer. I think that by just someone saying this, it's very difficult to figure out whether someone is or isn't a treasure revealer. These days, just by knowing how to read a bit and staying in just a month-long retreat searching for the origin of mind, people act as treasure revealers, even though they have never touched the feet of an embodied or ethereal qualified Lama, haven't ripened their mind streams through profound generation and perfection stages, haven't abandoned their yearning for the 8 worldly dharmas, and don't think they need to guard the proper vows and samaya. Everyone can see people who act like this. So just by being called a treasure revealer, it's hard to know what the outcome will be. Hence, whether or not someone has identified a person as lowly as me as a treasure revealer, for one thing, I have no deceit in my mind and no duplicity in my samaya. Second, like barley and oat seeds are different from the beginning. From the time I was 8 years old, lamas and khandros took care of me and established me in ripening and liberation. Third, with or without pages of symbols, I wrote treasure scriptures without any mental fabrication, corrections, or hesitation. Fourth, even though I had several clear prophetic registries that outlined everything pertaining to my method consorts, doctrine holders, teaching domains, and so forth, until the right time to actualize my former aspirations, I haven't done anything out of my own volition. I don't think to ask someone else, am I a treasure revealer? Besides, I'm one whose good qualities are all exhausted and who possesses all the faults. I'm a maidservant to the household named Gara, so whenever I look at myself, I don't even see a hair's tip of good qualities. These days, my becoming someone who is neither nun nor laywoman has emerged from the kindness of my excellent guide and teacher, Yishin Norbu, wish-fulfilling jewel. That's, again, Dreamioser. The Lama, Adzom Drukpa, was delighted and said, daughter of a good father, of course you're like this. Being without duplicitous samaya, once a child has received father's jewel, what more is there? Then Lama Rinpoche, Adzom Drukpa, gave me teachings on the cycle Kunken Lame Damtri, the omniscient master's explanation, and especially Urso Tigle Tri, explanation on clear light vital essence. I offered him the complete reading transmission lineage for the Varahi Dharma cycle of the Khandro Songzo, secret treasury of the Dakini cycle. My consort, Aksharabhantra, Drok Aksharabhadra, the red underlined thing right there, that is, again, you don't really need to be a Sanskrit pundit to see that that is Gyurme Dorjé, prepared the resources for me to reveal a profound treasure from Dongra Drakar entitled Khandro Gongpa Dupa, embodiment of the Dakini's realization, from the profound cycle Tuktik, heart essence. For the purpose of auspicious connections, the Vidyadhara Drondul Pao Dorjé and his son Gyurme Dorjé acted as instigators, Kowapo, and again now we have both names spelled out in Tibetan, by offering me nice clothes, a lotus crown, and other assorted jewels, along with a silk good day offering scarf. When they did this, I ascertained the Gongdu Druptap Yangzap Ningpo, ultra-profound quintessence of the embodiment of realization sadhana. I left the other auspicious connections for later. We spoke to each other extensively about everything worldly and dharmic without leaving anything out. In particular, Lama Rinpoche, that's Adzom Drukpa, cared for me with great love. He gave me advice on both worldly and dharmic matters and offered me blessings, thereby dispelling any harm to the auspicious connections. He completely cured me of all illness, and especially he gave me several objects that symbolized body, speech, mind, good qualities, and enlightened activities. He made aspiration prayers that in this life, the next, and the intermediate state, we would never part. As supports for his longevity, I offered him a white Tara wish-fulfilling wheel statue made of whitish, reddish, yellowish bronze that previously had been given by a non-human god, together with an auspicious scarf. Through this, I nourished auspicious connections. And then she mentions that the Adzom folks escort her back a ways very lovingly. They make her promise to come back again, and she says she will. I don't have time to read this, but I just want to say she does go back. She mentions much more briefly her second visit. It's in 1932, many years later. We see again that she met Gyurme Dorjé because Angyur Rinpoche is another of Gyurme Dorjé's names. What's more interesting to me about the second passage is actually this mention of Tromge Khandro Dawa Druma, who is the sort of narrative center of this passage. If anybody's ever heard of her, I'd be really curious to know, because Sera Khandro seems pretty excited about meeting this woman. So she must be a local Khandro from that area who comes up more than once in the story. In conclusion, circling back to the original question, how do available sources represent Sera Khandro Dewai Dorjé's relationship to Adzom Gar, and what should we make of the considerable differences between these sources? We've just heard most of what Sera Khandro has to say about Adzom Drukpa and Gyurme Dorjé. It's important to note that she does not state precisely whether or not she acted as a consort to Adzom Drukpa. She could have just performed rituals for his long life, catalyzing auspicious connections with her physical presence and also the presence that she describes offering him. We can't really tell from her text. He was over 80 years old and ill when she went to Adzom Gar in 1923, and she was 50 years his junior. Sera Khandro does explicitly state, however, that Gyurme Dorjé was her consort, using the word drok, and also prophecies throughout the 400 plus folios of Sera Khandro's autobiography underscore this identification. As for why Sera Khandro had so much more to say about Adzom Gar than the Adzom father and son duo had to say about her, here are some ideas that come to my mind. This could be because we're comparing apples and oranges. It may be that outside of Gyurme Dorjé's collected works, there are other inner and secret accounts of his life to be found in which he does talk about more esoteric aspects of his life. Sera Khandro identifies her autobiography as an outer, inner, and secret namtar, whereas Gyurme Dorjé's brief account of his life is an outer namtar, according to his biographer, and it reads as such with all of those extensive lists. Gyurme Dorjé's 5 volumes of collected works contain no cycle of prophecies or pure visions, probably because his primary role wasn't as a treasure revealer. To really know if Gyurme Dorjé left more private accounts of his interactions with Sera Khandro would require a comparison of apples to apples. We would need to do more spade work in unpublished sources and relationship building with Adzom lineage holders to know if he wrote about his inner and secret Dharma practices elsewhere. Another factor in the very different degrees of emphasis we see in our available sources is that Gyurme Dorjé publicly identified as a celibate monk, and Sera Khandro identified throughout her life as, quote, Jomin Nakman, neither nun nor laywoman, thereby occupying an indeterminate status in which she never claimed to maintain celibacy vows. Therefore, she arguably had less to worry about than Gyurme Dorjé did in making these matters public. Another possible salient factor here is the gendered dimensions of what inspires faith. Both Gyurme Dorjé and Sera Khandro explicitly state that their motivations for writing about their lives were to inspire faith in their disciples. Gyurme Dorjé inspired faith by emphasizing his pure motivation from childhood to accomplish the Dharma, and by listening to the many teachings he received by listing the many teachings he received and propagated as the son of a renowned master. Sera Khandro inspired faith by describing her visionary experiences, which identified her as a treasure revealer. Her detailed account of her interactions with Adzom Drukpa dwells on this very question of the authenticity of her claim to be a treasure revealer, which needed much more proving in her case as a highly unusual laywoman treasure revealer, Nakmo Tertunshik, as Adzom Drukpa referred to her, which almost feels a little bit like a contradiction in terms. For Sera Khandro, describing her association with notable masters of her era, such as Adzom Drukpa and Gyurme Dorjé, enhanced her profile as a leading figure of her day, whereas for Gyurme Dorjé, admitting a liaison with Sera Khandro could have even been a source of embarrassment, or, at the very least, something to brush under the rug, given his comportment as a celibate monk. Lastly, another major difference between Gyurme Dorjé's life and stories about it and those of Sera Khandro pertains to Dendrel. Recently, I've written about the ubiquity and multivalency of Dendrel elsewhere, but here I want to make the point that Dendrel, in its meaning as auspicious connections necessary for treasure revelation, was both more important in Sera Khandro's life than it was in Gyurme Dorjé's, due to the centrality of revelation in her life, as well as more difficult for her to effect as a female outsider to ecclesiastic hierarchy in eastern Tibet. For Gyurme Dorjé, the radical contingency of relationships forged by Dendrel does not seem to have influenced the surety of his ability to receive all the teachings he wanted as the Tulku son of Adzom Drukpa. But for Sera Khandro, Adzom Drukpa and Gyurme Dorjé were both important catalysts, kulwapo, of Dendrel for her revelations, and therefore they figure centrally in her writings. Thank you.
All right, so we have time for a few questions. All right, we already got one on the back.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Just very briefly, I wanted to suggest that Trongé Khandro Dawa Droma might have been the late Chagdu Tulku's mother, who was from Trongé, was a Khandro, and was named Dawa Droma.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know why that didn't cross my mind, but it didn't, and I should follow up on that. I've been intrigued about it for a while because there aren't that many women that get that sort of glowing treatment that she does in Sera Khandro's writing. Very cool. Another tie to the living contemporary world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. It was so nice to see the one event described in different biographies and then thinking through why that might be. It's really exciting. And also I enjoyed being able to read the Tibetan along with you. So I was wondering about this drok. Um, when are you translating it as consort or friend? I also have this issue in Khandro Ningtig when it gives advice about wrong companions or wrong consorts next to texts that are very explicitly definitely about consorts and others that are more ambiguous. So what would you say for how you make that decision? In this passage, it's so definitive because it tells us that Gyaltse was her consort. So could you share more about that process?
Yeah, it's a struggle, and there are some passages where I have a kind of questioning feeling in my mind. I think it has to do with context a lot and reading the word in just its broader meaning on the page, in the paragraph, in the phrase, in that moment in time. So it's not just grammatical evidence on the page, but there are, I mean, drok can mean a lot of things, like drok den cheba, right? It can mean to help, like I helped the person out, that and have nothing at all to do with anything that we're talking about here. It can also mean friend. I think if we're talking about treasure revelation and the auspicious connections necessary, and the word drok is placed before the name, then it seems a little bit more like a title, right? Like the drok. And in that case, I think the reading consort, which also it's short for top drok, it's a fair reading. Like I would stand by that. I don't think it's a question there. And Drok Akshara Bhadra, right? Like she put the Sanskrit again. So she's being sort of careful. You know, she didn't say, Gyurme Dorjé is my drok, top drok. She didn't say that in Tibetan. She indicated that in the way that she wrote. And what that means is still unclear. I'm just saying what I think is on the page. I couldn't speculate beyond that. So I guess, in short, I think it has to do with context. But I think that not all instances of the word drok necessarily mean this. So we also have to be careful not to read it where it doesn't exist. But I guess I'm going to still double down and say that's what I'm hearing here. Oh, Anne.
Thank you so much for filling out some of the things we've been wondering about for a while.
Maybe just put it right up to your face.
Hello? No?
Here, I'll walk over with this one.
Yeah, thank you so much for filling out some of the details of this very interesting connection that I've been curious about for a long time. I think learned it as well. And just one small thing, if I picked it up correctly, I want to ask. I heard you say that Tashilamo, in the text indicates that Tashilama was the mother of Gyurme Dorjé. And later you mentioned the other children, but not in connection with Tashilamo. Is there any doubt that she was the mother also of Chime Wangmo?
I think she is the mother of Chime Wangmo. I think Chime Wangmo is the eldest child, and I think there are 5 kids. Sorry, I went fast because I was worried about time. I had a longer description. There's Chime Wangmo's first, then there are 2 sons that are recognized as Tugus. One of them dies in childhood at age 3 or 4. So I think Gyurme Dorjé is the 3rd living child, but then there's a 4th one after him. So I think in Gyurme Dorjé's autobiography, he says that. And it's also curious that there's so much confusion about his birth date because he repeats it over and over in precisely the same way. I think it's just one of those lost in translation things. He says he was born in the year, it's either 1896 or 97, depending on what month.
Oh, interesting. And Pema Wangel is not mentioned by name? Or I can ask you this another time.
I can easily look that up if I don't find it at this second.
Okay, I'll keep a note. Thank you. That was great. Wonderful talk. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll look it up later for you.
Okay, we have time for one last question, if there is one, and if not, we will break.
I definitely have more than one, but I'll restrict myself to one at this moment. I'm just curious about that everybody else gets the title Tibetan, and she bestows it upon herself, and then her reason for doing so, I thought was really, really fascinating. And especially the line about how she says the people who get it assigned by others are like Chinese emperors, and she's doing like a different route, if I understood correctly.
I think the metaphor there is that in previous times in Tibet, Chinese emperors would bestow titles upon people who were already actually the leader of their area. So it's like, I don't have to wait for some Chinese emperor to bestow a title upon me. I already know that I am sovereign in this way, I think is what the metaphor means there. And also this whole thing about being a self-identified Tibetan is kind of a derogatory thing, right? Because you can't identify yourself as a Tibetan. And so this whole thing is a rhetorical analysis in dialogue form about the authenticity of her claim to be a treasure revealer. And Adzom Drukpa is saying, no, I don't know if you're the real deal. And she's saying, yeah, maybe I'm not. I just, write down whatever comes to mind. And so at the end he's like, oh, dude, you are the real thing, So that's sort of the way I read that, in short.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, everybody. We'll be back in 15 minutes, 3 o'clock. Yeah.